here. I don't want this. I never wanted this.
William Golding's debut novel, Lord of the Flies, has been brought back to the screens for an international audience after initially streaming in some regions in February 2026. And we're sure English teachers across the globe couldn't be happier. I remember reading that book as part of my 7th grade syllabus, but honestly, it wasn't until years later that I reread it and fell in love with Golding's craft. So to watch those 4 young boys scrambling for survival has been an absolute treat. Created by Adolescence famed Jack Thorne, the 4-part TV series does absolute justice to the book, and it's a pretty faithful adaptation. Thorne himself told Radio Times that he wanted a true adaptation of the book. Seriously, executive producer Joel Wilson asked him about a book he'd been desperate to work on but couldn't yet, and he answered, Lord of the Flies. It's always been Lord of the Flies for me, and I've tried a few times. Yep, this is Thorne's dream project, but still there are some differences between the novel and the TV show, and though they don't affect the integrity of the plot, it's important to check them out. So that's why we made this video today. Here goes 8 aspects where the adaptation strayed a little bit in the new Lord of the Flies TV series. Let's get into it. The backstories of the boys are explored in detail. This is perhaps one of the more major alterations Thorne did, but again, adapting a novel into a series allows one that time frame to explore characters in detail, and honestly, we loved it. We did get 2 movies based on the novel in 1963 and 1990, but Thorne went into an uncharted depth for the show. So, Lord of the Flies follows a group of young boys who are left stranded on an isolated tropical island after a plane crash in the 1950s. Without any guardian in sight, the pre-adolescent children are forced to go through a feral experience for survival. The story mostly focuses on Ralph and Piggy, with other significant characters like Jack, Simon, and Roger, along with some other secondary ones. Thorne actually gives us much more insight into who the boys are, and the situations they come from, which essentially shaped them. This is something comparatively less delved into in Golding's book. We see through flashbacks that Ralph has been coping with the loss of his mother and didn't have the courage to face his grieving father, and instead chose to talk to an empathetic fellow officer outside. Jack, on the other hand, the infamously savage antagonist of the story, is shown dealing with feelings of inadequacy and tries his best to please his dad, while Simon's history is portrayed in a much more complicated manner, with his mother apparently going through physical abuse. Interestingly, the 4 episodes have each been named after one of the central characters. Piggy, Jack, Simon, and Ralph follow their perspectives. This shows that Thorne wanted to get into the interiority of the characters rather than what's necessarily available in the book. However, Thorne told Radio Times that this was a reflection of his own interpretation of the book. To quote him, "I think that's what the Golding estate went for, because we were able to show them, actually, it works beautifully with how he told the story. That you've got the democracy with Piggy, and then you've got the breakdown of democracy with Jack, and then you've got the chaos with Simon, and then you've got war with Ralph. And actually, each different piece of that puzzle, there's bits of key information that has to be carried by that child, but it also allows you to spend time with them." The series opens differently from the book. The opening sentence of Lord of the Flies is etched into my brain. The boy with fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way toward the lagoon. This boy was none other than Ralph, and when I tuned in to watch the show, I was expecting to see the camera roll on Winston Sawyer's first before David McKenna's Piggy screams, "Wait a minute, I got caught up." However, Thorne chose to open the series by putting the initial light on Piggy and changed the tone immediately. We're introduced to the accident through Piggy's point of view, who's shown wandering through the jungle and observing the wreckage caused from the downed aircraft before he meets Ralph. In fact, Piggy got quite some footage in the show, and his real name is revealed to be Nicholas. Once Ralph and Piggy become best friends, Ralph even tries to make up for his mistake of exposing his not-so-respectful nickname and starts calling him Nicky. The book doesn't take this approach and never gives us Piggy's real name. Moreover, Ralph certainly never called him Nicky in Golding's original story. The pilot's body is discovered much later in the book. The pilot's body is indeed discovered in both the book and the show, but it happens much later in Golding's work. By chapter 6, the boys mistake the pilot's corpse for a beast, and it was the twins, Sam and Eric, who first brought the news. Sam and Eric exclaimed how they witnessed the teeth and claws of the creature, which moved, and said, "That was awful, it kind of sat up." Then, 3 chapters later, Simon, who was already doubting the credibility of the story, especially because these beasts left no tracks and weren't fast enough to catch the twins, actually discovered the truth. He found a humped thing sitting up on the top, covered by flies. Eventually, he mustered enough courage to examine the teeth, the white nasal bones, and the color of corruption. He realized how the canvas and layers of rubber held together a body that should be rotting and was moved by the wind. He understood the beast was harmless and horrible. It was actually the pilot, but before he could tell this to everyone, he died a gruesome death. However, in the show, the corpse is discovered early on by Ralph and Piggy, who decide to throw it over the edge of the cliff. The first hunt caused a blame game. Similar to the book, Jack hesitates too long during their first hunt. The boys had found a piglet caught in the creepers, and Jack drew his knife and raised his arm in the air. Golding described his indecision as, there came a pause, a hiatus. The pig continued to scream, and the creepers to jerk, and the blade continued to flash at the end of a bony arm. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormous downward stroke would be. During this time, the piglet tore free and escaped, and the boys were left looking at each other before breaking down into laughter, while Jack tried to justify how he was looking for the right place and the right moment to strike the animal. In the show as well, Jack, played by Lox Pratt, stalls before stabbing the piglet, allowing it to escape. Here too, he claims he was looking for the right place to stab the pig, but blames Piggy for not closing in on the animal and helping Jack, thus letting the prey flee, which marks the start of their bitter animosity. Jack's reaction after the first hunt and his mountain climbing are depicted differently. In Thorne's adaptation, after the first successful hunt, Jack leaves the head of a slaughtered female pig on a spike, and this moment conveyed a sense of declaration of Jack's prowess to the other boys. However, in the actual story, when Jack and the others actually manage to hunt a pig, he says, "Pick up the pig. This head is for the beast. It's a gift." But this was changed to solidify Jack's attitude as a sign of respect for the unknown threat of the jungle. Another interesting aspect of Jack's story came from his climbing experience. In the show, when Jack attempts to climb a massive rocky cliff by the beach to inspect the wreckage and find something useful, he becomes terrified as he keeps on climbing. Jack was then carefully guided back down by another boy, one step at a time. In Golding's writing, Jack does have a somewhat similar experience, but there, he climbs a mountain in search of the beast, and after getting scared, he returns and falsely claims that he did see the creature. Piggy's death is given a more emotional twist. In the chapter titled Castle Rock, poor Piggy meets his end during a confrontation between Ralph's group and Jack's tribe. Roger intentionally drops a boulder on him, which causes Piggy to fall 40 feet below and die instantly. Here's how it was written by Golding. The rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee, the conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. Piggy, saying nothing, with no time for even a grunt, traveled through the air sideways from the rock, turning over as he went. The rock bounded twice and was lost in the forest. Piggy fell 40 feet and landed on his back across the square red rock in the sea. His head opened and stuff came out and turned red. Piggy's arms and legs twitched a bit, like a pig's after it's been killed. Then the sea breathed again in a long, slow sigh. The water boiled white and pink over the rock, and when it went, sucking back again, the body of Piggy was gone. Ralph's pain was expressed through silence when his lips curled to say a word, but nothing came out. He was broken, and Jack's group attacked him with spears, but he didn't feel any pain. He just ran in panic, trying to fathom what had just happened. Thorne, however, dares out this part and makes us reach for the tissue box. Here, though Piggy is hit with a rock and his conch shatters on the beach, he's not immediately dead. And Ralph then tries his best to save Piggy, carrying him into the jungle with blood dripping and desperately attempting to nurse his wounds. But Piggy's head laceration is too severe, and he later dies of his injuries. But that time span where we see Piggy slowly fading away and talking about building a boat to travel north with Ralph, when the latter goes to look for water saying, "I won't be long," before taking a good look at Piggy, broke our hearts into a million pieces. Then they have their last night together, hugging, and Piggy says, "Sorry, Ralph, I feel cold." It's absolutely brutal. The next morning, Ralph buries him in the woods, and yes, this iteration gives more time between the two and adds an emotional and personal layer to Piggy's death, the weight of which Ralph carries into the final act. The ending differs emotionally. As far as how both Golding and Thorne's adaptation concludes, it's pretty much the same. Ralph is left alone after losing Piggy and Simon when Jack and his tribe are hunting him down across the island. As the boys set the forest on fire to flush Ralph out of hiding, we're thrown into full-blown chaos. Just when Ralph is on the verge of being killed, he stumbles onto a beach and comes across a naval officer who's arrived thanks to the smoke. This structure has been kept intact, but minute changes include Ralph's reaction when the officer asks who the chief is. In the book, Ralph doesn't hesitate to claim his authority, but in the show, he first looks at Jack, who's in shock, and then states his chiefdom. This little glimpse showed how Jack silently surrendered in the final moments. The officer, who was completely unaware of the horror these boys went through, treats the situation lightly, expecting better behavior from a group of civilized boys, and when he sees the others emerge holding spears, he asks whether they were playing. Ralph recounts the events and tells him that 2 are dead while reliving everything that he went through, including the loss of his friends. But that's about it. Thorne chose to trade an emotional outburst for a quiet stillness. While in the novel, the boys end up crying, here they remain unsettlingly calm, and the nonchalant dropping of the spears on being rescued suggests that they have been permanently changed. Expanded and diverse cast. Thorne gave us a confirmed number of castaways, which was 30, and though he included names from the book like Bill, Morris, and Robert, he made a greater ensemble for the TV show. Also, Golding doesn't explicitly state the number of stranded boys, and all we got in the book are the descriptions of the 3 groups, namely Ralph's, Jack's, and the Little 'uns. Golding wrote, "The smaller boys were known now by the generic title of Little 'uns." Also, in the book, it's heavily suggested that the boys belong to upper-class white English families, especially since they attend private school, and Golding wrote the book as a critical response to R.M. Ballantyne's The Coral Island. Thorne, however, brought in more diversity for both the group and the main leads by using David McKenna as an Irish piggy and a mixed-race Winston Sawyers as Ralph. He said in the same interview with Radio Times, "I think it's a perfect book. I think it's wonderful, and I think it gets misappropriated as being a book that's about black and white. I think what's wonderful about his writing, and what I hope we bring out in this adaptation, is that it's about glorious shades of gray." Sadly though, guys, that's all we got for you today. It's great that the creators didn't try to override the source material and incorporated only minimal changes, some of which genuinely felt needed and well executed. Lord of the Flies is thus an absolutely worthy watch, even for lovers of the book, because of how human and haunting it feels. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to share it with your friends. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one. Bye for now.